Hello. Tami Talks Trauma is a podcast where we discuss the myriad ways trauma impacts our moment-to-moment living and how to turn a disconnected life into one of alignment. We dive into personal story and then practical ways to calm our brains and nervous systems as we heal and grow. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you find tangible ways to live your most vibrant life. Today's guest is Rebecca Thomas. For more than 20 years, Rebecca has been helping people break through obstacles that seem to be holding them back in life. With her high energy, contagious confidence, and natural ability to lead, she's been teaching women how to show up for themselves in big, unapologetic ways. Her clients reclaim their power, live intentionally, and do so their way, making up their own rules as they go. You can find Rebecca on her website at www.mariavenus.com or on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as Marie of Venus. Hello, and thank you for joining another episode of Tami Talks Trauma. I'm really excited about our guest today. Our guest today is named Rebecca Thomas, and I just want to say hi. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, Tami. I'm so excited to have our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm excited for everybody to hear about you and what you do. So I always love to start with just a little bit of story and who you are and where you've come from, what you've overcome to be where you are today. So why don't you share a little bit with us about your story?
Yeah. So I think some of the more relevant things is I am a mother of a 19-year-old. He just turned 19. I'm the oldest of seven, and I have five younger sisters. I mainly work with women, so I feel like that's a huge nod to that whole sisterhood piece. Um, Growing up, like there's been so many things that have happened throughout my lifetime, but like I was not raised with my mom, so that's one piece of it, and we can dive more into that during the conversation. I was actually raised mostly by my grandparents when I was younger. My dad was in the military. um, Took me to my grandparents, stayed with them for quite a few years, and was always super, super close to them. So that was a huge part of my upbringing. Ran away from home when I was 16, eloped when I was 18, like did all kinds of different things and have a ton of life experience. And so, yeah, just a lot of what I've been through and what I've experienced has really shaped who I am in a lot of amazing ways. And I also feel like everything happens for a reason too. So everything that's happened in my past has definitely contributed to who I am now, and I wouldn't change a thing. So yeah, that's like the short version, but I'm sure that's not very clear either. So
No, that's okay. We can totally get into it more in this
yeah.
conversation. So, all right. Well, then, so coming from where you've come from, what would you say then, if everything happens for a reason and you've been
Mhm.
through so many different experiences, what would you say are your superpowers that have come out of that?
Yeah. So some of my biggest superpowers are radical acceptance. So
Mm,
not fighting what is, but accepting it for what it is. But then that doesn't mean that I like it. It doesn't mean that I'm okay with it, but it's instead of trying to fight it, more flowing with it and figuring out how I can make it work for me. So that's definitely a big one. Another huge one is my ability to hold space. I think that's
mm,
definitely part of my being the oldest of seven, leadership positions. The oldest daughter, like I've just always been amazing at holding space for people, and it just gets better
mm,
and better. So that's a huge piece of who I am and what I do. And then another thing is just my confidence, and I call it my contagious confidence, because
mm,
one of the things that I've heard over and over and that I note about myself is people will tell me that when they're around me, they just feel like everything's going to be okay. And it's not because I'm fixing problems, but it's just this, it kind of ties back to the radical acceptance, where it's like, okay, maybe we don't like where we are, but let's, take a beat, figure out what's going on, and then figure out what we can or can't do about it moving forward and put our energy there versus just going into chaos. So I would say those are
mm.
some of the top three for sure.
Yeah, those are really powerful. I love all three. I think radical acceptance is it's such a crucial part, especially with
Mm-hmm.
trauma, because like you said, it is what it is. So it's happened. It's there.
Mm-hmm.
and you can't change it. You can't go back and unhappen.
Mm-hmm.
So now how do you move forward? I love that. And I love
Yeah.
the holding space piece. That is such a big part of coaching, is giving people the space
Mm-hmm.
to just sit there and
Yeah.
be able to be themselves, and without judgment, without shame, without
Mm-hmm.
expectation. That's one of the biggest reasons I love coaching, is that it gives people a chance to be heard. I think
Mm-hmm.
so rarely do people come into a conversation with another person sitting there saying, okay, I want to hear from you. I want to hold space for you. I want to be
Mm-hmm.
with you. So often people come into conversation with, okay, well, that's what they're saying. Okay, how am I going to respond? What am I going to say to
Uh-huh.
engage with them? And there's nothing wrong with wanting to engage with people.
Yeah.
But the holding space piece, that's really powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
then I can attest your confidence. It comes through. I could feel it as
Thank
soon
you.
as you got on the call. I was just like, oh, I can feel it. She oozes it.
Aw, thank you.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, well, we've talked about your superpowers. So, what do you mean when you say that your superpowers are one side of a two-sided coin?
Yeah, that's something I love to talk about. I'm sure a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us have heard like about the shadow and the light piece when it comes to who we
Mm,
are, our psyche, our ego, all of those things. And so, like, for instance, when it comes to, what example do I want to use? When it comes to like my ability, like my hyper awareness, that's one of the things I talk a lot about. And that's something that I have developed, again, going back to that being oldest of seven, some of the
mm,
trauma that I experienced growing up, just the way our family was in general, that hyper independence, like all of those things were things that helped shape my hyper independent or my hyper awareness. I've worked on the hyper independence, thank goodness. But as far as the hyper awareness, like that's something that has allowed me to better understand myself. And so when I work with my clients and when I connect with other people, instead of bringing them to that same level of hyper awareness, what I do is I give them just enough, or I teach them to do it just enough that it actually benefits them. But I wouldn't have that hyper awareness without the things that I've been through. So when I talk about it being two sides of the same coin, sometimes it's easy to get hung up on like not liking something about ourselves or not liking the experience that shaped
mm.
that, but we literally wouldn't have that if it wasn't for the thing that we went through, despite whether we liked
Mm.
it or not. So that's what I mean when I talk about being part of a two-sided coin.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. I think so often what we go through shapes us, and we can embrace that and say, okay, and figure out what to do with it. Or we can live in denial
Mm-hmm.
and reject it. But we know that it doesn't, those things that we go through, they don't go anywhere. They stay in our body,
Mm-hmm.
they stay with us, even if
Yeah.
we mentally refuse to acknowledge them.
Yeah.
So it's really powerful to have that awareness to be able to say, okay, like it takes us back to what I said before, where you get to sit and look at what's in front of you, and you get to decide what to do with it. You get to
Mm-hmm.
decide, is this going to crush me, or is this
Mm-hmm.
going to empower me?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really powerful, as especially as coaches, that we do that with ourselves first,
Oh, yeah.
and really live that out. I know, obviously, I don't know if you do this. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I can put pressure on myself to be like, I have to live out all of this self-awareness and self-work. Like I have
Mm.
to live it out perfectly, or I can't help other people.
Yeah.
And I know that's not true.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to take stock of ourselves and who we are, and how we're going to respond, and what we're going to do with the cards that we've been dealt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then to go from there to use it to not just better ourselves, but then to allow that to pour into other people. I think that's
Yeah.
so powerful. So, so actually with that then, so what is it that you do for others? If we're
Yeah.
talking about how you've worked on yourself for your own good, what is it that you
Mm-hmm.
do for other people?
Yeah. So what I am is a life coach, and that's something that's very inherent to me. And I work with a lot of women. Again, going back to that oldest of seven, five younger sisters, that definitely plays a huge part of it. I was always in leadership positions of teams made of women, so that's just always been a piece of who I am. as far as what I do is I actually work with women 30 to 50 something generally who have scaled professionally, climbed the corporate ladder, and they're finding themselves on the other side of that. And sometimes they're even pivoting when we start working together. But they're taking an audit on their life and finding that one thing is missing, and that one thing is them. So it's like they've
Mm,
been very performative and they've done all these things and sacrificed so much time and energy to obtain something amazing, but at the same time, they just lost so much of who they are or compromised who they are. And so, what I help them do is figure out who they actually are, reclaim those pieces, but along the way, we also build boundaries that keep them in their integrity. We work on their self trust because that's a huge part of all that. Like, how do I dare be who I am? How will I be
mm,
allowed in the world as that person? And then that turns into the grounded confidence that really builds through all of that, which then turns into being able to live more authentically. So that's
mm.
core of everything that we do.
Yeah, I love that. First of all, I love that you work with women. I think that's really beautiful that you have that experience to be a safe space for women. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I think I love, love, love what you said about basically these women who they do all this work and what's the word? Um, they do all this work, they get all of these goals accomplished, and then they're
Mm-hmm.
standing there saying, where am I? Who am I?
Yeah,
Where am I in this?
exactly.
I relate to that so deeply because for me it wasn't career, for me it was family, but I grew
Mm-hmm.
up and was like, "Oh, you get married, you have
Yep.
kids."
The
Um
lie we were sold.
yeah,
Yeah.
and for me, as I've talked about it before, but part of my story is that I went from an extremely abusive childhood into really conservative evangelicalism that
Mm-hmm.
did not, ultimately, it did not serve me. At the time,
Mm-hmm.
it served me, but ultimately I had to get out of that world. But I did kind of a similar thing where I built up this life and I thought I had everything that I wanted. And then I just said, where am I? Like, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
here. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a wife and I'm a mom and I'm a friend and I'm
But
this
where's
person that all these
Tami?
people can, yes,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
these people can depend on me, but where am I? And
Yeah.
that's when I kind of blew my life up. And um, that's also when I found out that I had a lot of illness from my trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But my point with that is that it's so important. I think I have so many friends and people that I love and care about that are either still in that place where they don't know who they are and they don't
Yeah.
have any sense of identity, or they have started to realize that they're miserable but they feel stuck. They're stuck in, and I don't want, I am in no way advocating for people to just go around blowing up families and leaving their kids or anything like that.
Oh, it's so
um
layered.
yeah, yeah, I just want to make very
It's
clear
so layered.
that
Yeah.
I'm not like, woo, women get out and abandon your children. That, nothing
Yeah.
like that at all. Um yeah, that's a whole thing. But I just want to make very clear that's not what I'm saying. But I am
Mm-hmm.
saying that a lot of women are stuck and they don't know who they are. And
Mm-hmm.
part of why they're stuck is they don't know how to get out because they don't know how to even honor themselves. And
Yeah. And
so
mm-hmm. I was
I
gonna
was just
say, I
gonna say,
think,
so I'm grateful for what you do. But yeah,
yeah.
please say what you're gonna say.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say too is both of the things that you said, but then another piece that I see so often as well, and it's so crazy. I read a lot, I read a ton, and I stumbled on this reference to a book a couple of weeks ago. Ordered it. It's a book from like the 1960s called Feminine Mystique. And I'm reading it right now, and it's mind blowing because what we're talking about, like that loss of identity, is literally what this entire book is about. But it's just mind blowing to me that was written like 60 years ago, and so many of the things that
Yeah.
they're talking about are so relevant to like what
Mm,
I help women with. And I think another
yeah.
piece of where they can really get stuck is the fact it's like, I've got the job, I've got the family, I've got the friends, I've got all of these things, but deep down I have like this unsettling or this unhappiness, and I'm judging myself over
Mm,
that, like what, comparing myself. People have
mm,
it worse. Why? Who am I to be ungrateful or unhappy about those things? And that's part of what keeps them stuck, I think, is just feeling like, because they don't have words for it or they don't understand it, that they just stay stuck there and they think that something is wrong with them, which isn't the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. That's I think you nailed it, that it's a lack of identity and a lack of worth. And so then there's this inability, like you don't even know what you want. If you don't know who you
Mm-hmm.
are, then how can you know what you truly want? Okay, so I love what you said about helping women figure out who they are. And I especially love, and I have no problem with 20 somethings, just to be clear, but
Mm-hmm.
I really love that your target, or maybe not your target, but the people you tend to work with tend to be women in their
Mm-hmm.
30s to 50s. I love that because I
Yeah.
think I'm 42, and the older I get, the more I realize that it really is true that in such a patriarchal society,
Mm-hmm.
women don't even. I think that your average woman, obviously, some women are really lucky to be raised in an environment where they're told that they have worth and their parents work
Mm-hmm.
against the patriarchy. But a lot of us, I know for myself, are just completely raised by the patriarchy. We're raised
Yeah.
in this world where we exist for men, to serve men, to give
Mm-hmm.
men children, to give men homes, and to uplift men so men can rule the world.
Right.
And the older I get, the more I realize that you don't really realize what bullshit that is
Yeah.
until your
Or
30s.
how much it runs rampant in our lives.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend who she has a male friend that he's a wonderful guy, and he's not a predator, he's not gross. Yet he
Mm-hmm.
ended up in a situation with a 23-year-old woman where it was a work thing, but it was like the last bus was leaving, so he was like, "Well, you could just stay with me." And
Mm-hmm.
the long story short is that he wasn't gross, but at the same time, he had no clue, and he's in his
Oh,
late
yeah.
40s, so he
Like
had
just the
no clue
complete
that.
naivete almost because it's not their lived
Hmm.
experience. Oh, yeah. I've had that conversation with my
Yeah,
boyfriend several times
yeah, he just
where
had
it
no
doesn't even hit
clue
the
that.
radar.
Yeah, like it didn't even occur to him that she would be uncomfortable and want to say
Mm-hmm.
no, but not know how. And
Yeah.
she was 23, and I just think that a 23-year-old young woman is, she's only 5 years out from being a child. Like she's
Mm-hmm.
so
Right.
young and is just figuring herself out. And so just that piece where, there's this man who he just has no clue that he's put a woman in a situation where she feels that she can't say no, and that
Mm-hmm.
your average 33-year-old woman or 43-year-old woman's going to be like, "Hey, I really need to get to the bus.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves in 20 minutes. We're 15 minutes away. We need to go."
Yeah.
But this young woman just felt, like she kind of just needed to do
Mm-hmm.
whatever he wanted, and he wasn't paying attention to the time. And so, anyway, the point of that story is that so many young women, like you said, it can be that they're naive. It can be a lot of ignorance, even from good men, but
Mm-hmm.
women who just don't realize they have the ability to say no. They
Mm-hmm.
have like to them, it doesn't even occur that they can say no. They're just thinking, how do I be nice? How do I
Yeah.
not make
That.
waves? How do I not offend? How
Mm-hmm.
do I not hurt his feelings? But
Making
she
it
ended up
about
in an
them.
incredibly
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable situation. And
Yeah.
my friend and I just I we this was like 2 years ago, but that story really stuck with me as a good example of, like, and he ended up being safe, but what a
What if
bad
he
situation
wasn't?
she could have
Yeah.
ended up in. Yeah, like she could have
Yeah.
ended up in a really bad situation, and it's all because she didn't know how to say no. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
know how to stand up for herself and have that identity and have that worth and know what she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, that's something that's like when I talk about one of the things that happened, and it depends on who you ask, and I don't know if I'll ever get the whole story, but like the reason I was raised with my grandparents and that I wasn't raised with my mom is because my dad literally, like, he took me from my mom. He kidnapped me, whether formally,
mm,
informally, but in some capacity, he took me from her in that way. And so I was raised with him, and he was a good dad, and my grandfather was absolutely amazing, and I was a huge tomboy, and I was like, I always talk about how, I was daddy's girl and a grandpa's girl, but it wasn't like in the princess way. It was very much in the like, I was like one of the boys to them, which I
Mm.
think is one of the most beautiful things. Again, part of that two-sided coin is the fact that because I was raised in such masculine spaces and adopted some of their behaviors and mannerisms and ways of being, that's part of what contributes to how I show up. But
Mm.
the flip side of that, like being in my teens, I can think of a time like when I was going to church. We had three generations in the same church. I used church as my escape from my home life because I didn't want to
Mm.
be at home because everything was so dramatic and traumatic. And so sometimes I would get rides to church, and I can literally remember I was probably about 14 or 15 years old because it was before I ran away from home, calling one of the people to see if they could give me a ride to church, and them very pointedly saying, like, I can't give you a ride to church anymore because I don't know what they're going to say, because I was a developing young woman. And that person
Mm.
wasn't seedy at all. But looking back, I was like, how screwed up is that? Like, how screwed up is that, that
Mhm.
space? And I mean, in a lot of ways, we know those spaces aren't safe because of that. But it was like equally grateful for the fact that somebody wasn't trying to take advantage of me, but also just like, what the heck? Like, what?
Yeah.
It's just, it's ridiculous to me. But then, even being in my teens and being in my 20s, like the experiences that I had and being sexualized, being in the hospitality industry and bartending and waitressing,
Mm.
like that's just rampant with that stuff. So just all of the experiences again have been something that have given me perspective, allowed me to see through so many different lenses. And that's something that I can use not only to understand myself, but again, to help women better understand themselves.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and being in your 20s right now, it's hard. Like I mentor some
Yeah.
women in their 20s, and I feel like between the bombardment of information that they have
Mm.
and like just the pressure to do like all the things, like to have three streams of income and to do this and to that, like the pressures are different. But it feels like with
Mhm.
that bombardment of information, like it's even more prevalent than it was in some other ways before. But
Mm.
30s, 40s, 50s, Brene Brown, I can't think of the whole quote because it's pretty long, but she has that quote about midlife unraveling, and it's like the most beautiful thing to me.
Mm.
Sometimes when women share with me how they've been feeling or what they're experiencing or what they're sitting with and questioning with, or as Brene would say, rumbling with, I
Mm.
refer them to that quote because it's literally about dismantling, putting down your guard, putting down the armor, getting rid of the coping mechanisms that aren't working for you anymore, and choosing who
Mm.
you are, but also living life to your fullest at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love the imagery of dismantling, unraveling, taking, again, those things that we just thought we had to do. And now we
Mm-hmm.
realize they don't serve us. They're not
Yeah.
helping us. They're holding us back now.
Yeah.
And to dismantle that and say, okay, I'm going to figure out who I am. I'm going to stand up as
Mm-hmm.
myself in this world and take up space and go through it as me
Mm-hmm.
unapologetically.
Yep.
Um, okay, so believing that that is a beautiful, wonderful, empowering thing for women to do, how do
Mm-hmm.
you lead by example then as a coach?
Part of it is because I think about that all the time. Earlier you were talking about the fact that you put a lot of pressure on yourself. I come from a space of, and it's definitely like one of the huge motivators in wanting to, like one of the first dominoes to fall intentionally was when I had my son. I really started to sit back and look at, are these the things that I want for him? Whether it
Mm.
was relationships or family or trauma or coping mechanism, any of that. I was analyzing all of that and really started to sit with what I did and didn't want for him. So that's where I really started leading by example. And
Mm.
so it was like a way I held myself personally accountable, but it was initially for him.
Mm.
But in that process and some other processes that happened too, like eventually it turned into doing it for myself.
Mm.
So a lot of times, I mean, it's just like, it's the admittance, like permission to be human. Like
Mm.
everything's not going to be perfect. It's a process. You're not going to know all the things. And the more that you try to control it and understand it, like the more you're probably just going to hang yourself up because you can exhaust
Mm,
yourself with that. And most of the time, you're not going to get the answers, let alone the answers that you want.
mm,
So it's just very much permission to be human, but then also just to like let it be a process to figure it out, play with it. Like
mm,
it's not that serious. And if
mm,
you're not having fun and you're not enjoying your life and you're not finding joy and peace on a consistent basis, like what are you really doing? So permission to be
mm,
human, permission to find ease and joy, but just constantly like I'm learning beside you too. I don't show up and pretend like everything's perfect. And I think
mm,
that's part of the beautiful part about some of the things that have happened to me is because I show up as who I am, including like we always joke about the fact like soul shine is one of the terms that I use all the time. And I literally like I'll post it on my Instagram all the time. But that's one of the things I talk like I shine from my soul. And it's because I have that self-love and that confidence, which is all something I
mm,
very much worked for and intentionally built for myself. But if I can go through the things that I've gone through and let go of those things that aren't serving me anymore and choose to use definitions of what has happened in the past or things that are still a part of me to better understand and figure out where I want to go instead of
mm.
defining who I am, you can do it too. So that's the
Yeah.
biggest way is just that piece right there. Like it's permission to do it messy.
Mm. I like that. Permission to do it messy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so easy, and I do this, it's so easy to fall into the trap of when you're trying to honor yourself and build a meaningful, authentic, genuine life. It's so easy to put pressure on yourself to do it perfectly and to view
Mm-hmm.
it as a line that just goes up, 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 up.
Mm.
And I know that if you've ever seen The Good Place, I love that show, but
Mm-hmm.
it's the Jeremy Bearimy effect, but it's where life goes through all these loops, and sometimes you feel like you're going backwards, and sometimes you feel like
Uh-huh.
you're going down, and sometimes you feel like you're just stuck, but it's messy, and the point is that you keep facing forward,
Yeah.
that you know, like I'm I'm always so aware of cliches, but it's really true that you get knocked down and you have to get back up again. You
Yeah.
keep getting back up.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, which we never talk about, sometimes you're the person that knocked somebody else down
Mm-hmm.
and you need to own that. And
Oh yeah.
if they let you, help them get back up and help them keep
Yeah.
going forward. And to to recognize that it's okay that it's messy. Like you said, there's permission to be human. There's permission
Mm-hmm.
to be imperfect. And I really love that. I love the imagery of starting out for your son and starting out
Mm-hmm.
doing these things for him and then realizing how much you deserve that for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that really is the best way to lead by example is
Absolutely.
to
Yeah,
do
and
that
that's
work
what
on yourself.
that's one of the things I remind, a lot of clients I work with, they have daughters or nieces or younger sisters. And so, when you can't do it for yourself because you're just not there yet, like
Mm,
those become your motivators because you are leading by example. It's not do it as I say, but do as I do. And so
yeah.
it's so easy to undermine the messages that we send to them, either literally or figuratively. So, I always love using that as a motivator. And one of the other things I love to say too is be kind to my friend, because again,
Mm,
if you're not really in a space yet where you are doing it for yourself, that still has the same effect and the
mm,
same outcome until they actually start doing it for themselves. So yeah,
mm.
there's little tricks like that I use because like I said, I've been there. Like I've been through the things and I understand it and I have the awareness. So I use
Yeah.
those tools and those understandings to be able to motivate and inspire them too when they're not
Yeah.
there for themselves yet.
Yeah. That's really powerful. It's so important to be willing to do the work on yourself and to utilize the tools on yourself
Mm-hmm.
before you try to help other people.
Yeah.
Um, so, okay, we've talked about just where you've come from and the work that you do and the ways that you help other people.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to ask you, what do you love the most about yourself? What do you love about you?
Um, honestly, I mean, it goes back to that radical acceptance piece. I love everything about myself,
Mm,
and just like life and our experiences and relationships, whether it's personal or friendships or romantic or whatever that looks like there's seasons and the tide is constantly rising and falling with everything, and nothing is ever going to be perfect. So just accepting myself where I am, how I am, and if I
mm,
choose to do something differently, like understanding the why behind that is huge for me. But
mm.
just constantly falling deeper in love with myself, like that is my favorite thing about me, is that I find myself continually falling deeper in love with myself, which tells me like I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. That is, I think that that is so beautiful and so powerful for the listeners because especially women, and my audience is primarily women. It's not all women, but it's primarily
Mm-hmm.
women. And especially in a world where again we're told to exist for others, to make life
Mm-hmm.
better for others, to make others comfortable, to make others feel loved, to make
Mm-hmm.
others feel seen, to make others feel heard,
Yeah.
to say I deserve to feel seen, I
Yeah.
deserve to feel heard, I deserve to show up, I deserve to take space.
Yeah.
That that is the most powerful thing we can do for ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
I will say for anyone listening who's like, how do I even do that? Where do I even start? Like, what,
Right.
like, well, first of all, you have two people here who would be more than happy to help
Yes.
you. But I will say the most practical tip I can give people is just to be curious. Be
Mm-hmm.
curious about who you are. And because I think we live in a world of so much judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking a lot recently about um, not just like tabloids, but just that whole culture that kind of tells us who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to
Yeah.
look like. Um,
The subliminal messaging.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's it's so important when you don't know who you are. Like if you're listening to this and you're like, I am definitely one of those women who doesn't know who I am. I don't know how to stand
Mm-hmm.
up for myself. I don't know how to take space.
Mm-hmm.
The best place to start is just to be curious. If you notice emotions running through you, to just kind of be curious about where is that coming from and where is it
Mm-hmm.
going. And if you can, to really let yourself feel that, like, where is this in my body? Like, I feel really anxious right now. Where do I feel it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of people feel it in their chest or their stomach, but some people can feel anxiety in a leg that won't stop,
Mm-hmm.
bouncing and ticking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to encourage the listeners who might hear this and be like, that sounds great. I do not know how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with curiosity and it starts
Yeah.
with that little bit of awareness. And then without judging yourself, just to say, oh,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so that might be something that's interesting to me. You know, like something happens and you realize you get really angry and you don't know why you're so angry. And just to let
Mm-hmm.
yourself explore that and start to figure out where that, because I really believe that for the average woman, there's a little girl who got silenced and stuffed into a patriarchal box at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a little girl who just wants to speak and be
Mm-hmm.
heard and be seen and be allowed to exist.
Yeah.
So I love that you do that work, that you've done that work on yourself, that you're in a place where you can help others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really beautiful. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, well, the way I love to end the show is for my guest to share what I call that one thing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
that one thing that helps you stay on track, that helps you keep focused on your goals,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps you, like we talked about earlier, the most important thing isn't that that you're climbing a staircase or a mountain and constantly,
Yeah.
going higher and higher at this wonderful steady rate, but instead in the messiness that you stay authentic and true to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, what is that one thing that helps you do that?
Oh man. It's so funny because if I had to say just the one thing, it's one of my core values is authenticity. But then another one of them is also autonomy. And that's one of
Mhm.
the things that I actually teach my clients to do is to figure out what their core values are because that's part of what can help guide us back to ourselves, but also guide us to more aligned decisions and actions once
Yes.
you start to understand yourself more. So, knowing that one of my core values is authenticity, like that's the thing, like it's already my North Star. And once you can
Yeah.
acknowledge and embrace that and lean into it, like the rest is kind of history.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really powerful that the most, I would say, the sharpest knife in the toolbox is authenticity and being yourself. And
Mm
you're speaking my language when you say to know your core values and then
hmm.
to
Mm
live in
hmm.
alignment. I talk a lot about that, about living in alignment. It's not about having this perfect life. It's not about never getting mad. It's not about, never having bad days or,
Mm
whatever
hmm.
your vices are. It's not about never doing that thing that you're trying to not do anymore.
Mm
It's
hmm.
about what do I value and getting myself back on track over and over and over again
Yeah.
and sticking again to those core values and that alignment to say, okay, I veered from the path, but this is who I am. This is what I value. I'm going to
Mm
keep
hmm.
coming back to this over and over and over and building that
Yeah.
foundation. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
And
really
it's so,
beautiful.
yeah, because when you say that, again, it goes back to that permission to be messy, right? Like, I think so often we can get caught up in the fact that we expect ourselves to do it perfectly right now,
Yeah.
right? Forgetting that it's a process, forgetting that we're human, forgetting to give
Yeah.
ourselves that permission. And once we can actually grant ourselves that, when you were talking about curiosity and judgment, that's something that I talk a lot about too. And it's so easy to think there's something wrong with us and think that we're doing it wrong. So when you can start getting curious and not assign right, wrong, good, or bad to
Mm-hmm.
something and
Mm-hmm.
let that piece go and just notice,
Yeah.
that's game changing.
Yeah, it is. That's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I've loved our conversation. Do you have
Yeah,
anything that
same.
came to your mind or anything that we touched on that you were wanting to touch on later that we didn't get to?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much like it's just such a blip of the overall conversation, but I think just getting out of our heads and stop the assumption that there's something wrong with you
Mm,
individually. A lot of people don't talk about these things, first of all, because they might not have language or understand it themselves. But if nobody else around you is talking about it, who's going to? Like, it's
yeah,
hard to be that vulnerable about something so intimate, especially when we're telling ourselves or assuming that something is wrong with ourselves or somebody
yeah,
else. So just letting that piece go and slowly tapping into spaces and people who are safe, like
yeah,
yourself and me, but then finding those spaces where people are actually willing and safely like sharing those vulnerable things in a
yeah,
way that creates growth and healing and connection, not
yeah,
commiseration and using that as a social currency. So yeah,
yeah.
that's probably the other thing I would say.
Mm, that's really, really good. That's really powerful. I love that. Yeah, it's so easy to connect with others. I mean, I have a friend who and it's totally I'm not being mean to myself about it because I think it's fun, but I have a
Uh-huh.
friend who is kind of an Eeyore, just
Okay.
just kind
Yep.
of a
Yep.
and I love him, but he's an Eeyore.
Uh-huh.
And he'll send me music, and I have different mental illnesses that I've dealt with that now I have them, I'm medicated and under control and living in
Mm-hmm.
such a way that they're not ruling over me. They did
Mm-hmm.
for a couple years there. Um, but he'll send me songs that are really just intense with people talking about, basically being fucked in the head essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And and we'll really bond over that. But I recognize that there's something powerful about someone else struggling and identifying in the struggle,
Yeah.
But there's also something so beautiful about, like you said, finding safe people who, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not that he's unsafe, but
Yeah.
finding people who help you focus on the growth and the
Yeah.
potential. And because I think I always talk about, like, we have this one life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even if you believe in reincarnation or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
or even if you believe there's an afterlife, it doesn't change the fact that even if you're right and those things happen, this is still your one shot at being you, alive on this
This
earth, walking
person.
around, living and
Mm-hmm.
breathing.
Or this being. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so to really, to try to spend that time leaning into what is boundless,
Mm-hmm.
and I just think about, like, the expansiveness of the universe, like, that we know that, like, the pillars of creation, that everything is just growing out and out and out, and there's just so
Uh-huh.
much room for expansion. And I love that imagery for ourselves mentally, that there's so
Mm-hmm.
much room for expansion and growth. And it's so easy, especially in our society, like you said, where you got to have three streams of income, and, like, there's all this
Uh-huh.
pressure, and a lot of that's just to be able to pay your bills, because we live in such
Right.
a intense capitalist, post-capitalist society.
Mm-hmm.
um, but it's it can be really easy to feel stuck and not move forward. And I love ending on the note of really valuing yourself enough to focus on growth and
Mm-hmm.
healing and safe spaces, and obviously to be that for other people, but to
Mm-hmm.
believe that you deserve to find that in other
Yeah.
people too.
Yeah.
I think that's the most powerful piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a pretty amazing space to be in.
Yeah. Well, I love this conversation. I thank you so much for showing up, and showing up authentically and
Yeah.
courageously. um, I feel really grateful for this space and this
Same.
podcast. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for
Yeah.
being a
Thank
part of it.
you.
Awesome. Well, to my listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you for joining another episode of Tami Talks Trauma. We are coming up on a brand new year with 2024, and we have all of these exciting things happening that at the beginning of the year, where we get excited and we make these promises to ourselves. And I just hope that in this new year, as we're kicking off 2024, that you will find space to be yourself and to love yourself and to honor yourself. And that 2024 is a year where at the end of it, you know yourself better than you did at the beginning, and you have a better sense of who you are to stand on your own 2 feet and to take up space in this world and to be your authentic self. And I hope that listening to this podcast helps you find that just a little bit more. So thank you for joining us. And I hope that you can get active on the social media that I post. I would love it if you could like and subscribe and share. All of those things help other people discover this podcast. And I really think it can help people. So thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you to my listeners. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you enjoyed joining me today on Tami Talks Trauma. May you feel inspired and encouraged to apply what you learned, so that you experience greater alignment and vibrancy in your one beautiful life. Please like, subscribe, leave comments or reviews. It helps this little baby podcast grow. You can always find me on my website, tamirose.com, or on social media as @TamiRoseCoach. See you next time, and to you, gorgeous human, let's thrive.